All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Elderwerks this afternoon for this presentation. As a friendly reminder, Elderwerks is a non-for-profit that assists seniors with everything aging, from resources to age well at home to education, such as today's presentation, to our Better Aging Expo, which will be happening in August on the 14th at Stonegate and Hoffman Estates, to the Advocacy and to the housing options that are out there for all seniors. We are thrilled to connect you with one of Elderwerks' partners, the Alzheimer's Association. Today, Hadi will be presenting today for us on advancing sciences, the latest in Alzheimer's and dementia research. I apparently can't talk today. I will ask while this presentation goes on, you stay muted, put any questions in the chat, and we will get those answered just as soon as you can. And then if you have any questions, my name is Dina, and I'm one of the team here at Elderwerks Educational Services. Hadi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to introduce a little bit about myself. I am the Senior Manager of Education and Community Volunteers at the Alzheimer's Association Illinois chapter, and one out of the two research champions for our region, which is Illinois, Kentucky, and Indiana. This presentation today, it really just kind of talks about, and I'll go through some of the learning objectives, but what is the latest of advances, what's happening in the research side of space? I am not a doctor or a researcher, but this is more of, things that we can take away for the general public. I've been with the association, it'll be a little over 10 years, and I actually joined it because it was more personal to me than professional. My grandma was diagnosed at the age of 67 with dementia, and she lived with this disease for 10 years. And when my grandpa passed away, we noticed different changes, and she was re-diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So for the last 5 years of her life, she moved in with my parents, and I moved home, and we were her caregivers. So I am very passionate. This presentation specifically, there is a lot of hope of what's happening on the research side of things. So I'm going to get started. As we know, Alzheimer's is a global health problem, and right now there's more than 6 million people living with the disease in the United States alone. Tremendous gains have been made in the understanding of the science and basic biology, really just underlying Alzheimer's and all those other dementias. These advances are leading great strides, especially in strategies where we're really focused on prevention, detection, diagnostics, and therapeutic interventions. The Alzheimer's Association is a global leader in research, so we're mobilizing the field to advance the vision of a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementias. So today, before we get started, I wanted to kind of talk about our vision and our mission. And as you can see on this slide, the two things of what the logo stands for, and that's the brain and the science. Our vision at the association is, like I said, a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementias. Sometimes when people hear the Alzheimer's Association, they think that we just service Alzheimer's, but it's all other dementias. Our mission is to lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementias by accelerating that global research. We really want to focus on driving risk reduction, early detection, and maximizing quality care and support. And what does that look like? It's education programs, support groups, care navigation, all of the services that the Alzheimer's Association provides. So today, we will look over the landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia science. You'll just take away some basic facts and figures regarding Alzheimer's and other dementias. We'll look over risk factors. We'll look at highlights and early detection and diagnosis. Here, what's important? Why are these needed in the research field? And then we're going to talk about the latest advances in clinical trials, treatments, and lifestyle interventions, because it's not just about medications. They're really focusing on those lifestyle interventions today. So for some who maybe don't necessarily know the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, I'll go over it today. So just to best describe it, dementia is your umbrella term, right? And you'll see here, it's used to describe a range of symptoms associated with cognitive impairment. This is something that is severe enough where it is disrupting your daily life. Yes, as we all get older, we don't maybe necessarily remember everything, but this is something where it catches somebody off guard. And one of the examples I always use is if you're holding your car keys in your hand and you don't know what to do with that, that's something significant enough. So when someone goes to the doctor, they talk about these symptoms. And some of these symptoms could be maybe an individual who used to love, having a to-do list is not checking those items off the to-do list. Or maybe they're taking their grocery list and they're going to the grocery store and they're sitting in aisle 10 thinking, well, why did I come here? But the grocery list is in their hand. So these are all the symptoms an individual will talk to their doctor about. Years and years ago, they would say, oh, the person is going senile or they have hardening of the arteries. And they thought that was normal aging. That is not normal aging. Dementia, so we have the umbrella term, it's your list of symptoms. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. 60 to 80% of cases is Alzheimer's. The best way to know is by getting a diagnosis. Alzheimer's disease, is the most common. And then you're going to see we have vascular dementia. So with vascular dementia, someone may have the biological changes associated with Alzheimer's disease, but they also will have vascular. One of the things that makes it difficult to diagnose and treat Alzheimer's and other dementias is the concept of what we hear of mixed dementia. This is where researchers right now are really focused today on trying just to develop new ways to accurately diagnose those biological changes, which will then eventually help us to really define the best care and treatment for individuals. Next, we have Lewy body dementia. So here it's sometimes if someone has Parkinson's, it's also associated with Lewy body. We're going to see shaking, shuffling, hallucinations. And actually, when Robin Williams passed away, they announced that he had Lewy body dementia. And lastly, frontal temporal dementia. Here, individuals are diagnosed in their mid 40s to early 50s. We just heard about Bruce Willis and his diagnosis. They become non-communicative, and here they start to really escalate faster. So dementia, your umbrella term, there's over 70 different dementias. The ones that we see on this slide are, I would say, the most common ones. So now we're looking at our current facts and figures, and actually the facts and figures were just released, and they didn't update this on time, but I can kind of go over some of the things that we're seeing in the facts and figures. Right now in Illinois, there's over 250,000 individuals living with this disease. The disease, we all probably know this places a very heavy burden on the healthcare system, which with total payments for care are at $345 billion, and that's projected to rise to $1 trillion by 2050. Alzheimer's today, with the over 6 million individuals living with this disease, they're looking at over 11 million Americans are providing that unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or dementia. We're also seeing every year the Alzheimer's Association has something called the special report. And what that special report focused on was the dementia care navigation journey. And what does that look like for individuals? Someone gets a diagnosis from their doctor. The caregiver's looking for resources. They're looking for help. They're looking for next steps. In 2023, the caregiver journey, in 2023, this Facts and Figures special report really focused on the patient journey and what we're now calling the era of new treatments. And what we found in that was only 40% of individuals talk to their doctors right away when they're experiencing early memory concerns or cognitive loss. The other 60%, what are they doing? They're talking with their peers. Did you forget where you put your keys. Does that happen to you? And it's more of looking at each other with camaraderie, thinking, okay, someone else is kind of going through those age-related changes instead of talking to their doctor about it. Alzheimer's disease occurs over a continuum, and I'm going to just let it auto-populate. But what does that mean? So when we talk about this, that means changes are happening over time. Everyone always starts off asymptomatic, meaning they have no cognitive changes happening in the brain. MCI, oh, excuse me, I went too fast. MCI due to Alzheimer's means someone is living with the early stages of cognitive loss. Here, it's not necessarily affecting most of their daily activities of daily living, but you're going to start to notice some noticeable changes. Someone who may go on to develop dementia due to Alzheimer's is passing through an additional phase. Here, it's mild, moderate, or severe. In the mild stages, typically this involves symptoms that will interfere with some daily activities, but individuals in the mild to early stage, some of them are still working, some of them are still driving independently. They still have their independence of the things that they do. We have a lot of early stage volunteers that do presentations out in the community that are advocates in Washington, D.C., in Springfield, and they're still able to do all the things that they love. Maybe they, pause for a second, look down at their notes, but then they can continue on. So here what we're starting to see is everyone who experiences dementia will have passed through a stage of mild cognitive impairment. We say MCI. But not everyone who has MCI has MCI due to Alzheimer's. So when I say due to Alzheimer's, it means that they have some underlying pathology in the brain, or those biological changes are happening, like the amyloid plaques or the tau tangles in the brain. But you can have mild cognitive impairment, and that can just be associated with side effects, right? Maybe from medications, maybe it's from vascular disease. So it's important to define what is the cause of mild cognitive impairment and really understanding what those causes are and those changes at the earliest stage as possible. When we move on to moderate here, and it tells us more pronounced symptoms, maybe they're having trouble getting dressed. So you're laying out clothes and they might not know, how to put their shirt on or how to put their socks on, or too many options. So if you're asking them, what would you like for lunch? A ham sandwich, a turkey sandwich, or do you want a grilled cheese? That might be too many options. Now we have to scale those back and just say, here's your lunch. I decided to make us a turkey and cheese sandwich. In the more severe stages, this will interfere with most of their daily activities. In the severe/late stage, we're going to notice long-term memory starts to go. So in the beginning, it's short-term. As the disease progresses, it's long-term. Some individuals are wheelchair bound. They're bed bound. One thing to know, every individual is different. So what might have happened for my grandma does not necessarily mean that that would happen to someone else. Now, what are these hallmarks of Alzheimer's? The neurotic plaques, also known as the beta amyloid plaques, are a buildup of protein that sits outside of the neurons or the cells in the brain. There's another type of protein, and we call those taus. And the changes in the tau protein create kind of a tangled web. So inside the cells that decrease their overall cellular communication, so the ability to transport chemicals and nutrients across the cell. And you're going to see here by the brain on the right side of your screen, you are looking at a healthy brain, no buildup of amyloid plaques or tangles. Then you see one with advanced Alzheimer's, and you start to see that shrinkage. The plaques and tangles are the two hallmarks of Alzheimer's. What ends up happening, and the best way I describe it is, in a brain, we have signals, kind of like a neuron forest. They bounce back and forth to each other, telling us when it's time to walk, talk, breathe, etc. And in Alzheimer's brain, the first thing that becomes affected is our hippocampus area. We call that our memory bank. That is the formation of new memories. So when you're speaking to somebody and 5 minutes later, they're asking the same question, and you're thinking, didn't I just answer that? That's the first thing that goes. As the disease progresses, it's going to move throughout different processes of the brain. So their judgment, their thinking, and so on. And by the end stages, that's when our brain is starting to shut down. And you'll see that. So when we think about who might actually be at risk for developing Alzheimer's, We're learning more about what impact each individual has, any group, and even population levels at risk. So who may be at impact? And this is something that we see all the time. So people always ask, what are modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors? What's important is Alzheimer's, not typical aging. It has many causes and risk factors. When we talk about non-modifiable risk factors, here I'm talking about things we cannot change. We can't change our age, we can't change genetics. Age is the greatest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's. So after the age of 65, our chances start to increase every 5 years. After the age of 85, we start to get about a 50% chance of developing the disease. Genetics plays a role. Family history plays a role. When we think of race, ethnicity, sex, and gender, this is a construct that we're really still learning more about and what types of risks that we impose for different groups. So when we think about modifiable risk factors, these are things that we can change or influence. So for instance, if we live a very sedentary lifestyle, we can build physical activity into our day. They say average adults need 2 hours and 30 minutes of physical activity. That's starting small. We've all heard those sayings. If you're able, park at the last spot in the parking lot, or take the stairs instead of the elevator. If you can't do 30 minutes, break them down into 15-minute increments. But really focus on your physical activity. What does physical activity do? It releases the stress. Stress is a risk factor. Other things we can change are cardiovascular health. Sleep is so important. It is not a myth. Individuals need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And they're also focused on diet. And most of us already know this, but the two diets that they're talking about and looking into is the Mediterranean diet and the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which is also called the DASH diet. And what these diets really focus on is whole grains, lean meats, lean, poultry, seafood is important, legumes, our berries that we think about, good fat, avocado, olive oil, and it's really eliminating the processed foods. It's eliminating sugar, because individuals that do eat overly processed foods are at a higher risk, up to I think 40% or 50% of risk factor. So these are things that we can change. Many of these combined together may drive overall risk. So there are a number of reasons for each individual and each group that may be fundamental and unique. I'm going to go through some of the research later on of what they're currently studying in this kind of space. But we also notice that there are disparities in Alzheimer's disease prevalence when it comes to women. African Americans and Hispanics are disproportionately affected. Almost 2/3 of Americans living with Alzheimer's are women. We still don't understand the reason for this. When I first started over 10 years ago, it was because, women live longer than men, but that's not necessarily accurate. Current research suggests that there might be both biological and life experiences that contribute to this disparity. From the research that we've seen, we know that ethno-racial groups have been historically underrepresented in clinical studies, which is really underscoring the need for more diversity. So if an individual, Black African Americans are 2 times greater than whites to develop the disease, and Hispanic Americans, Latinos are 1.5 times more likely. So I want to focus now on what we're seeing in terms of progress in the research space. It is an exciting time in research. We get to see this every day working at the Alzheimer's Association, because we're so involved in a lot of the research that's happening across the globe. I like to say at any given moment when we're asleep, someone's in a lab trying to find, the next cure or a prevention for this disease. Right now, we have more than 360 million active and committed funding and more than 1,000 research projects in 53 countries, spanning 6 out of the 7 continents, except Antarctica. So again, any given moment, research is starting to happen, which is very important because it's happening all around the world. We also advocate. Here, when it comes to research, we are attacking Alzheimer's from many fronts to really focus on our detection, our prevention, early diagnosis, and treatment. Over the past few years, and you can see on the slide that the funding at the level of the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, from our federal research affairs have really increased enormously. We now have 3.7 billion annually that's given to the National Institutes of Health to support their research in Alzheimer's and dementia science. And really, this is just a phenomenal thing to see. And a lot of this is due to the dedication of our advocates who have been fiercely working for years to try to increase this funding, because this funding brings innovative ideas and fills those gaps in knowledge and not just focusing on conservative approaches anymore. Also, this is some of the research that we are having done in our community. So, we've awarded 141 grant awards. We have 23 active. The total amount to $28.5 million to funded institutions like the University of Chicago, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and we have 204 iStart members. So these are individuals that are members of this, I don't want to say society, but they go in and this is where they can present their research. Every year, the Alzheimer's Association has something called the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, and this is from researchers and scientists nationwide, worldwide, globally, that come all over the world to present their research. So they will have poster boards, and a lot of our iStart members present their posters at AAIC. So now I'm going to move on to early detection and diagnosis, because what we really know today is that an early diagnosis can have really important emotional, social, and medical benefits for individuals. When an individual gets diagnosed in the early stages, it allows them to have access, potentially better care services, and even be able to participate in clinical trials. We know clinical trials will play an enormous role in helping to find the newest and best treatments, and even potentially a cure for Alzheimer's and other dementias in the future. We also know that participating in a clinical trial has many benefits and maximizing an individual's health care. Here, the individual can still make plans for their future. So they get a diagnosis in the early stages, they can understand what's happening, they can explore those treatment options, going into clinical trials. They can make legal and financial decisions. They're part of their care team, right? They're building their care team all around them, and really effectively manage the cost of care. So, when the individual, maybe they live alone and now they're thinking, well, eventually I might not be able to live alone. What does that look like? Am I going to move into a memory care community? Will I move in with one of my children? Will I have a full-time caregiver? They're able to make those decisions. We also know participating in clinical trials, they're also the ones to receive one of the first and maybe even notice treatments that will be approved by the FDA in the future. So we're literally modernizing the diagnosis. Previously, we could diagnose Alzheimer's and another dementia based on medical history and just the cognitive paper and pencil test. But now we're seeing a movement to incorporate biomarkers. And they're really saying biomarkers are going to change the game. And that gives us a window where we really can start to try symptoms earlier, enrolling people in those clinical trials, especially for the prevention type of approaches. If we can identify who's at risk and define who might be a right fit for certain types of clinical trials, that will be a game changer. So biomarker technologies are really changing this game for the field and research, and is moving at really a remarkable pace. These tools and technologies are experienced in the physician's office in many ways in the future, but they are already a critical part of how we conduct a lot of these clinical research studies today. And when we say biomarkers, we're talking about those tools and technologies that are going to help us tell changes that might start to happen in our body. And a lot of you are quite familiar with some types of biomarkers already. You use them as a way to understand your risk for heart disease by measuring cholesterol in your blood, or even looking at your glucose numbers by looking at a blood test. So we need types of tools and technologies for Alzheimer's and dementia. We've seen advances in brain imaging, and biofluid analysis when we're looking at specific proteins in the cerebral spinal fluid and our blood that may tell us changes that are happening in the brain. So we're seeing important work that's being done and looking at emerging biomarkers. What if one day you were able to walk into your doctor's office and actually get a retinal imaging scan that could give you some kind of indication of risk for developing Alzheimer's disease or another dementia in the future? It sounds quite futuristic, but this is what they're focusing on. There's a lot more that still needs to be done to make sure all these biomarkers are standardized and validated and become very reliable tools for predicting risk and diagnosing the disease. Let's touch on some of the biomarkers that have a big part of the movement towards creating a better toolkit for physicians to help diagnose patients, as well as aim to developing a better care plan for their patients. We've seen many advances in the brain PET imaging. So brain PET imaging is that type of scan that's known as posterior emission tomography. It's a scan that allows the doctor to diagnose and treat memory conditions, but it also can be used to measure the other types of things in the human body. The type of scan that we're talking about today are amyloid and even tau PET imaging, which is really looking at the two hallmarks, like I mentioned early on, of Alzheimer's. And both of these tau and amyloid imaging markers are approved by the FDA for these types of scans. The scan information can help exclude Alzheimer's and may also aid in the diagnostic process of the disease. We know there's not one single test, but using a brain imaging scan can be one of those approaches to aid in that diagnostic process and help potentially guide patient management. I am actually going to skip over this because there was an IDEA study, and actually because of the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid approving PET scans, the new IDEA study has actually subsided, and the last person was March 1st, where they were done with the study. So moving on to the new era of diagnostics, when we're really looking at those biomarkers, there's several groups from academia and industry that continue to work tirelessly to develop these types of tests. And these tests are looking at more than just that amyloid beta and tau. Emerging tests are incorporating markers for cell death, inflammation, and changes to the blood vessels around the brain. Tests to aid in the diagnostics of Alzheimer's look at blood and fluid surrounding the brain and the spinal cord, and that's called CSF. So here you'll notice cerebral spinal fluid. They are being used to help enroll volunteers into clinical trials. Currently, there are 4 FDA-approved treatments for CSF and several emerging blood tests that can be used to predict the likelihood of amyloid plaques in the brain. So while these tests represent tremendous progress, more data is needed before the blood test can be broadly used or used as standalone tests. It bears repeating biomarker fluids. Biofluid biomarkers are looking at blood saliva. They're looking at that cerebral spinal fluid in development. And there is an urgent need right now to accelerate that early detection and accurate diagnosis in clinical trials and practice. However, these tools will not entirely replace PET scans in the near future. So where are we in terms of progress towards risk reduction and more effective treatments? Let's start by covering the process it takes to discover new treatments. Then we'll look at some of the treatments on the horizon. This is probably one of my favorite slides because this right here, I believe, gives people hope. Up to 40% of dementia cases could be prevented or delayed if we targeted those modifiable risk factors. Research suggests combining multiple healthy factors may be the most impactful. And when I talk about risk factors, I want to remind everyone, going back to that earlier graph, that is talking more about our physical activity, our cardiovascular health, that healthy diet, cognitive stimulation. So for those individuals that love to play Sudoku, keep doing it. They said, years and years ago, people would actually pull out a map to get to their destination. They're encouraging people, take a map. I couldn't do that. I'd be in Wisconsin, but if you can read a map, take out a map. Trick your brain. I always encourage people, and I always get like weird looks like that's odd, but if you're used to brushing your teeth with your right hand, try brushing your teeth with your left hand. I know it sounds odd, but your mind goes into autopilot when you brush your teeth because you've done it for so long. It takes a second for your brain to catch up. So do these things. They say if you take the same route to work, try taking a different route. Again, going into autopilot. And we know people do not do well in isolation. So social engagement is huge. You know, whether it's being part of book clubs, walking groups, whatever that looks like, we just know people thrive off of human interaction. And based on the research we're seeing, it's likely that combining healthy factors for risk reduction might be the most impactful, not just at targeting a single one of these factors. From what we've seen, the strength of evidence leads us to believe that heart health is something that's very, very important. The Alzheimer's Association, we're leading a landmark clinical trial called the US Pointer Study. And this is a self-guided and structured intervention that looks at the multi-domain approach to risk reduction. So for individuals, you have to be eligible for this study. People are going into this study age 60, 79 years old. They have to be a risk for cognitive decline, meaning they have a parent or a sibling that has memory loss. And they have to have some means of improvement themselves. That could look like maybe they have a sedentary lifestyle and they need to improve that, or maybe they have a horrible diet. The self-guided study, they work on, for 4 weeks, they work on nutrition. For 4 weeks, they log everything that they do for physical activity, and it moves on and on. The more structured, they meet with a US Pointer Navigator and a group of people that are in the study. And for 4 weeks, they talk about everything on their logs. And then they submit that data, right? So currently right now, the US Pointer Study is actually starting to graduate a lot of their study groups, which was phenomenal. Over 2,000 participants, it's happening, and over 5 sites across the United States. We have Rush and Advocate Aurora Health that were participating in this study. The important part about the US Pointer Study is that we need to understand if an approach like this is going to work across our diverse culture of the United States. So they have committed themselves to making sure that we're using a community-based outreach in terms of recruitment and representation to be the mechanism for us to truly understand across all those populations of the United States, whether or not our strategy for risk reduction like this is going to be something that's sustainable, is it accessible, and if it's effective across all communities. So this is some good stuff. And nearly 30% of those individuals in the US Pointer Study were from historically underrepresented populations. Now, the drug development process takes many decades before therapy comes to the market. And the Alzheimer's Association is funding across the entire pipeline of therapeutics from all of the preclinical discovery, so those laboratory experiments and cells in additional lab, all the way through phase 3 clinical trials. And this is where you want to see that research progress from the preclinical research all the way through phase 3. And it's not until after phase 3 do we have the ability to submit these types of therapeutics to the FDA for their review and potential approvals for their use for patients. Right now, here on this slide, you're going to see a lot of the FDA-approved therapies for Alzheimer's. There are currently 7 FDA-approved therapies that treat many different features of Alzheimer's. So let's look at the FDA-approved therapies. The disease was first described in 1906 by Dr. Alois Alzheimer's, after whom the disease is named. At that time, when he discovered Alzheimer's, his first patient was a goose eater, and it was a woman in her early 50s. We were in the scientific revolution. So he diagnosed a goose under a microscope. That's how we were back then. Fast forward, in 1996, the first treatment for Alzheimer's was approved. Many of you may be familiar with, and forgive me, some of these clinical terms, I can't say the medications, but dozapavir, also known as Aricept. And then in orange are the medications that only treat the cognitive and functional symptoms of the disease. These include the cholinesterase inhibitors and glutamate modulators. So what happens is these drugs do not slow down, they don't modify, they don't stop or reverse the disease process. Rather, they only temporarily treat the cognitive and functional symptoms. And the way I like to describe these drugs is they have the ability to sort of increase the efficiency of the cells and how they talk to and listen to each other, but they don't necessarily prevent the cells from dying. And it's really important to be able to slow down the disease process, right? We need to prevent those cells from dying in the first place. A lot of research has been done, and that we're seeing today is really focused on drugs that are aimed at preventing those cells from dying. Now you're going to see in 2020 something called Suvorant or Belsorma, which was previously approved by the FDA to treat insomnia, and individuals completed these clinical trials in people with Alzheimer's or dementia. This drug was demonstrated in those trials to be safe and effective in people living with Alzheimer's and dementia. The new trial is now included in the prescribing information for this drug. And we know with, sleep disturbances is huge when it comes to individuals living with this disease. In 2021, we saw the first approval of a new drug in a category of treatments, and this was aimed at actually slowing down the disease progression. It was a therapy. It's called aducanumab, also known as Aduhelm. And this targeted those amyloid plaques in the brain. Aduhelm is one of those many drugs that are primarily focused on a treatment. Here, this is not a medication, these were infusions. Aduhelm has actually been discontinued because they are focusing on Leqembi, which was released in 2023. Leqembi is the second drug that slows down the disease progression by targeting that underlying biology of the brain. This really changes the course of Alzheimer's disease in a meaningful way for the individuals in the early stage of the disease. And that is why we're so focused on that early diagnosis, that early detection, having people talk about it. Because again, it might not be Alzheimer's or dementia, it could be something else. But these therapies are helping individuals. It's stopping the disease from progressing. It's letting them live longer in those early stages, giving them more time, to participate in those family, events, weddings, graduations, being able to work longer. Also in 2023, the FDA approved Rexulti, which is approved to treat agitation. It's important that we also continue to develop medications that target those behavioral and psychological symptoms of Alzheimer's to really improve quality of life in all stages of dementia and to help really reduce that care partner burden that's associated with a lot of these challenging behaviors. In this next slide, you're going to see now that there is a lot of stuff that is happening over unique. So today there's over 140 unique therapies that is being tested in clinical trials that target multiple aspects of Alzheimer's biology. So now we have 2 new FDA approved drugs that target amyloid in the brain and slow down disease progression. We have that one more amyloid targeting drug called Donanemab, and it's in the late stage of clinical trials. We recently heard those top line results of the phase 3 clinical trials. And this drug showed the strongest phase 3 data for an Alzheimer's treatment to date. So these treatments have been submitted to the FDA for review, and we're waiting to hear back on that. But it's not just therapies, medications, lifestyle interventions. They're looking at over 140 unique ways to really find some kind of prevention for the disease. Every study, and I'm going to shift here to the next part of the talk because we not always just want to be treating disease with drugs, right? Or even other types of devices or interventions in the nature, but we also want to be doing risk reduction across a life course that will help us to prevent the disease from happening even in the first place. So right now there's an urgent need for inclusion of individuals, especially in underrepresented backgrounds in clinical trials. so that new discoveries can benefit all. The Alzheimer's Association has something called Trial Match. So if you're interested in getting involved in research, I encourage you to check out Trial Match. This is a service that the Alzheimer's Association offers, and you can find alz.org/trial match. It's a place where you're able to find a customized list of potential research studies. So what happens is when you fill out a trial match profile, they give you a list of, let's say, 21 questions, and they pair you to a trial or clinical study. I am part of a clinical study. I don't have to leave the comfort of my home. So every 6 to 12 months, they send me brain games and they test how fast, I can match the cards or my response time. And that's part of a prevention trial. There are many different ways for those individuals living with the disease. They go into those clinical trials that have a lot of these therapies. And this could just be a way for us to get information, for other, not only just people living with the disease, but healthy volunteers as well. So we are entering that new phase. Research becomes clinical care, which is reflected in treatment and monitoring. We know that a one-size-fits-all approach may not be effective for all people. This is why more research is needed, really to move us into the age of precision medicine for Alzheimer's. We believe that the future of Alzheimer's treatment will be a powerful combination of an effective drug treatment, but also lifestyle intervention and risk reduction. I want to end the presentation on the Alzheimer's Association resources. We know science moves fast, and really to stay up to speed, here are some of the resources that we have. We have alz.org/research. And for more information on research that's happening in the Alzheimer's and dementia space, you can visit Trial Match to find clinical studies near you. We also have our 24/7 helpline number. They're available 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days. The one wonderful thing about them, these are master level clinicians that can help you. So maybe you're looking for information and referral. They can help you with that. Maybe you're looking for support groups in the area. They can, give you the list of those support groups. So they're there for even those immediate needs. So now I want to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions. Oh, I see some in here.
So I think, how do you find out more information about clinical trials? I think you covered that, and the site is on the screen now. The next question is, and what about serious side effects such as brain bleeds with infusions?
Yeah. So
and the cost of insurance.
Yeah. So some individuals did have those serious side effects, such as the brain bleeds with infusion. And actually, we had our research symposium last November, and there was someone that was on the panel that was on the Leqembi trial, and she did get a minor brain bleed, but it wasn't severe enough. So of course, it's rare, but it does happen. But that happens in a lot of infusions or therapies with side effects. Are all the costs covered by insurance? So that's a good question. I don't really like to answer insurance questions. The PET scans are covered by insurance. One of the therapies were focused on, it was $26,000 a year for individuals to take this, right? But really right now, the whole focus is finding accessible treatment for everyone, not to have cost barriers. I don't know what insurance covers and doesn't. I don't like to talk about it because I feel like when I'm privy to it, it changes again. So I suggest call the insurance carrier or provider, and they would guide you best.
Yeah, it even if somebody says, oh, Medicare covers that, there's a lot of confusion with Medicare replacement plans and what is covered, what is not. So yes, always check your plans. Another question that has come up is, please talk about the trials that address tau tangles and brain inflammation, if you are able to.
Yeah, I'm not sure about those trials because that's a whole separate department called in the trial match department. So they focus on those trials. I don't. But if you can, I can look more into it for you and give you that if you want to put just privately message me your email if you like, and I can give you more of that information. I can ask our medical and scientific department.
And any additional handouts that you have, Hadi, if you send those to me, we can
Sure.
email it out to any of our attendees. Are there any other questions, anyone? All right. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to partner with the Alzheimer's Association. Elderworks greatly appreciates your partnership and how we can work together to educate and support not only the persons living with dementia, but their family members, and provide those resources for all of those that also care for these individuals. Thank you so much, Hadi. I greatly appreciate it. And then if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Elderworks. Hadi, you're just getting a bunch of applause in the chat right now. Feel free to reach out to Elderworks. You can reach us at the office at 847-462-0885, or you can always ask for help at help@Elderworks, ELD. Boy, I just messed that one up. help@elderworks.org, ELDERWERKS.org. Have a great day, everyone.